Hello, and thank you for joining us for the latest in Education Today's series of webinars looking at current topics in UK education. My name is Jonathan Swift, and I'm the Managing Editor of Education Today. Today, we're taking as our topic, what can we do to address the decline in pupil mental health and well-being? It seems beyond doubt that we have a problem on our hands when it comes to pupil mental health. With that in mind, we highlight some of the statistics around this worrying trend, look at the impact it can have on schools, and offer some practical pointers to help. To put this firmly into a school setting, I'm delighted to welcome along Jakki Rogers, head teacher at a primary school in the northwest of England, Gareth Jones, student wellbeing support and designated safeguarding lead at Halcyon School, and Bex Randalls from the Outward Bound Trust. Before we get going, a quick housekeeping note for you. Please make use of the questions facility on the webinar screen to put your questions to Jakki, Gareth and Bex. The webinar runs for an hour today, and we'll be pausing at a couple of points during it to deal with any questions raised, but should time run short, any we've been unable to deal with will be forwarded to our guest speakers for follow-up. One final note. We'd ask you please to use the rating system for this webinar to help us evaluate how useful they are to you, our audience. Just click on the rate button and let us know what you think. So, with that said, I'll introduce Jakki and Gareth. There they are, smiling. And here's Bex to get us started with what can we do to address the decline in pupil mental health and well-being. Bex, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so just to kick off, we'll clarify what we mean by mental health and well-being. It's obviously a difficult one to define, but generally it's accepted that it's not just the absence of mental health problems. There are lots and lots of different definitions kicking about, but this one, the World Health Organization definition, is quite comprehensive. So mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. With that definition as a basis, I'll hand over to Jakki and Gareth to talk through their experiences with tackling the decline of mental health and well-being in young people.
So first we're going to take a look at what does the current research tell us about student mental health and wellness. To start off, I'd just like to say we're currently seeing worrying trends in mental health and wellness, and this has been outlined by the following research that we can see from the National Health Service and from the British Medical Journal. And here are some of the findings from that research. So 1 in 8 5 to 19-year-olds had at least one mental health disorder when assessed in 2017, sorry.
And rates of emotional disorders, including anxiety and depressive disorders, mania, bipolar affective disorder, have increased in both boys and girls, up from 4.3% in 1999 and 3.9% in 2004 to 5.8% in 2017.
Children and young people with mental health disorder are more likely to play truant at 8.5% from school than those without the disorder at 0.8%. School exclusion was also more common in those with a disorder at 6.5% versus those without at 0.5%.
And a recent UK analysis reported a 68% increase in hospital self-harm presentations in 13 to 16-year-old girls between 2011 and 2014, which is incredibly worrying. So what are some of the challenges primary and secondary state students are facing today? Well, the big one, of course, is always academic pressures. Primary children now are tested formally 5 times in 7 years, not to mention the optional SATs. Schools use up to 3 times a year to check progress. We've got that increased accountability agenda, which is incredibly high stakes for schools, and so schools, feel forced into a certain path of action. And so in so many cases, SATs become very, very high profile in year 6. We all know about that. And as hard as you might try, it's incredibly hard not to pass those anxieties on to the children. And I've watched perfectly competent and indeed very talented children crumble in the face of tests, sitting there crying through the whole paper. Also on top of that, we've got the year 6 curriculum that becomes incredibly limited to English and maths. And that further impoverishes their experience when school should be about enriching experiences and actually looking at the holistic and the whole child. Added to this, there's an awful lot to be taught in a school day without the requisite time to process that information effectively, and that leads to cognitive overload. So our children are sort of bombarded with information on a school day, not enough time to process it, and of course that then adds to increased stress, anxieties. I think generally, as a school system, we seem to forget that children are children and not actually machines.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo that, Jakki, I think we've obviously seen this situation where it feels like year after year, every single one of our young people face testing, and I think the bigger picture is what can we do about it in terms of future national curriculum reviews, and where we look towards other education systems and we look towards different types of education for ideas on how they've reduced testing. So, for example, there's very little testing seen in things like fieldwork education's international primary curriculum, and can we learn from that when looking forward, because they still have excellent outcomes for the young people that do those curriculums. I think in terms of where we're going, the recent changes that have been discussed by Ofsted are a positive. I think with judgments being made by shifting the focus from results onto what is being taught and how schools are achieving a good education is a good thing, and Spielman stating that Ofsted inspections focus too much on the outcomes, which places too much weight on tests and exam results, again is a good thing. So I do think there is a from the inspectorate. Hopefully we will see that. We'll see that reflected into change in the future, but I think there is a willingness to reduce academic pressures.
And of course then we've also got our social pressures alongside our academic pressures. When I was growing up, the influence of the media was limited to 4 TV channels, can you imagine? And whatever I saw in Smash Hits magazine. But in this day and age, we've got children who are bombarded with information without the necessary skills to evaluate and process it. And at the same time as this, people have access to you in ways that they didn't before. Many of our young people have got their phones or tablets or internet-capable TVs in their room. They're on networked play on Xboxes or PlayStations. I think I've said that right. I think I'm a bit too old to really understand that. But all of this put children at risk of exposure to all sorts, and often parental inattention or just lack of understanding from parents means that our children are on these devices until the early hours of the morning. And as a head teacher, I dealt with countless issues of very nasty online bullying that occurred well outside of school hours, extremely nasty, with long-lasting impact on the anxieties and mental health of the victims, and a noticeable impact on concentration levels and confidence levels of the children then in school.
Yeah, and just to kind of second that kind of increase in social media and peer pressure that we see in terms of the challenges for young people, I think it's to know that we're all here right now on a webinar, listening to this, engaging with digital media and a social-based chat on the right-hand side of your screens that is positive to learning. And I think the challenges come when we are not helping people become digitally literate. It's a vital skill for young people as they move on to future workplaces, as we're using right now. And I think it's a vital element for most future workplaces. And with any skill, we'd expect that it would need to be taught and developed amongst young people. And that's something that we will reflect on later when we look at some of the ways to better support young people and their well-being in schools, some of the strategies that we may use. So I think whether it's cyberbullying or using devices late into the night, it's going to reduce the amount of sleep that we have, and unless we're giving the young people the right skills in order to cope with this, when they lose sleep, sleep does have a direct impact on well-being, and that will be a problem for them.
And then alongside all of this, the academic pressures, the social pressures, we have a distinct lack of support structures. Increasingly agencies that would previously have supported children, Healthy Young Minds, CAMS, their capacity is significantly reduced. And also then our parental support network. So we've got increasing recognition now of the impact of adverse childhood experiences on our children, which tend to come through things like divorce, death, poverty, abuse, parental incarceration, parental inattention through hours worked. All of these things interfere with the healthy attachment that foster children's self-esteem, sense of mastery, their own environment, and optimistic attitudes. There's a fantastic book, by the way, if anybody's interested, Eric Jensen, Teaching with Poverty in Mind, that talks an awful lot about this. So these ACEs, if you've got 4 or more, the likelihood of you heading into destructive behaviour is quite significant. So, for example, 4 or more ACEs with no available, always trusted adult, 4 times more likely to be a high-risk drinker, 6 times more likely to have sex under the age of 16 years, 11 times more likely to have smoked cannabis, 14 times more likely to have been a victim of violence, 15 times more likely to have committed violence, and 20 times more likely to have been incarcerated at any point in their lifetime. And then we've also got a very alarming statistic that amongst the group of the population that have got 4 or more ACEs, there's 14 times the number of suicide attempts compared to those that don't have 4 or more ACEs. It should be said, though, that if you've got 4 or more ACEs and you've got that available adult, the impact of these things has a lesser effect. But if you just look at the pyramid here, adverse childhood experiences in those early ages, 0 to 3, which we all know are critical, we have that disrupted neurodevelopment, which then leads on to social, emotional and cognitive impairment. We know all about that in schools and the impact of that. Then we move on to an adoption of high-risk behaviours, as we've talked a little bit about there. Then we move on to disease, disability and social problems, and then ultimately early death. There's quite an alarming statistic on something about people dying 20 years earlier if you've got 6 or more ACEs.
If we move on and take a look at the indoor generation. So currently I'm working in a school in central London, and we do seek to get our students out as much as possible, but we don't have much outdoor space immediately accessible to us. We have parks not so far away, but it is more difficult, and this is the same for more and more people as more and more people live in cities and urban areas than ever before. And schools over the last couple of decades have had their playgrounds and spaces reduced. Parents are worrying more and more about playing outdoors because of safety. And all of this has led to a reduction in outdoor time that our young people have, and it leads to shocking statistics such as the one reported in the Times newspaper last week. And this is, I'll just read it out, a study that tracked almost 1 million people found that those who were raised among the lowest levels of green space were as much as 55% more likely to develop disorders such as substance abuse, stress-related illnesses and schizophrenia. So what are the potential effects of all of these areas on students' mental well-being? So on the screen you can see different impacts of the multiple challenges. There are a number of them there for you to read, but in my time working in schools I've had first experience of all of these areas, and I think it's vitally important that we're aware of these challenges so we can best identify the early warning signs and understand what people are going through, and then enable us to support through the challenges and find ways to support our young people in reducing their prevalence of such challenges.
And I should say at this point, with all those people who are still with us, this isn't all doom and gloom, this presentation. We do have some strategies that can address some of this, so hang in there.
Yes, bear with. We're definitely moving towards strategies that we're using, myself and Jakki. So how are these impacting on education? So how are these challenges that young people are facing impacting on their education? Here, the big thing is they're effectively impacting the learning that young people do within the class because of a lack of attendance,
Apologies, I think, have we lost Gareth?
I think we possibly have. Do you want me to carry on?
Would you mind, Jackie?
No, that's fine.
So,
So,
we'll see if we can get Gareth back on again.
Okay, so obviously our rise in challenging behaviour, we have very poor attendance statistics, inattention, lack of engagement, and all of this goes back to that sort of poorer neurodevelopment and therefore cognitive engagement, low cognitive performance, reduced engagement with peers, and so you know, some of the strategies that we've considered, and Gareth was going to talk about the whole school approach, he possibly is talking about it and doesn't realise that his phone's gone off. So, because I've just noticed he's moved the slides on. Do we want to try and get him to dial back in?
Yes, I think that would probably be the best thing, if Gareth can hear us. So if we just pause there for a second.
But shall I answer any questions that anybody's got?
Yeah, while we've got a moment to see if we can get Gareth back in. The social media side, obviously there are, you know, conflicting reports, government guidance suggesting one thing, academics at Cambridge suggesting that maybe the harmful effects of screen time are negligible. I mean, obviously, I'm a parent, and I'm aware of the amount of screen time that certainly my teenage daughter has. But is social media being pilloried unfairly, or does it really have a case to answer, do you think?
Well, I think I would say that those Cambridge academics haven't spent much time in my head teacher office. You know, for sure, I have seen the impact on several children. You know, I can't talk in as much as, you know, I haven't done research in this, but certainly on the ground, you know, dealing with children who are frightened to come to school because of something that was said to them on, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning by somebody else who was going to get them because they killed them on, oh goodness, Call of Duty, you know.
Fortnite.
So Fortnite, yes, that lovely one. So I don't think it's being pilloried. I think the Cambridge academics are talking about responsible usage.
Yeah.
You know, where parents actually have some oversight of what's going on, where children have that experience of being able to think for themselves and not just to consume whatever's being thrown in front of them. And also those children who know not to post daft images of themselves or you know, some crazy comment that is going to be there for their lifetime. So I think that possibly the research might say it doesn't have that sort of impact, but certainly what I'm seeing on the ground is that we are then having to deal with lots of children who are impacted by the various bits and bobs that are going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly challenged my, you know, limited experience. But I mean, yeah, my daughter had an issue. She was bullied over email, and as a primary school, and the primary school's response was good, but there was only so much really that they could do. And you know, the concern for us as parents was that it would affect her use of email and social media in the future. With hindsight, it hasn't particularly, but I think something you mentioned before, with, you know, children are exposed to a lot of information, but they don't necessarily have the faculties to filter it and to understand that some things aren't important. Seeing it on a screen somehow seems to lend it legitimacy, certainly to younger children, and you know, primary school children are maybe more susceptible to it than older children. Would you think that's fair, or is it a problem?
I don't know. I think primary school children are more likely to go to their parents or available adults.
Yeah, my daughter did. Yeah, she
are more likely to come to me or a trusted adult in school to deal with something. But you know, as children get a bit older, I don't know whether or not that continues. You know, so I would hope that, you know, my daughter's 11, and I would hope that she'd still want to come to me with anything.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, my daughter did. She came to us with this problem, and we sorted it out for her. But you know, I think when you combine that with I mean, as I say, she's 15. Combine that with general reticence on behalf of teens to share things with their parents. I think it's quite important that schools have structures in place, which I know we're moving on to
absolutely. Well, we'll be talking about digital literacy in a minute. So
yeah. I mean, her school was very good and supported her. But anyway. So I think we've got Gareth back. Are you back?
Yeah, I apologise, everyone. I don't know when I off the line actually, which is very frustrating. So if we could...
You were still broadcasting because we could see things moving, or rather you were moving through the slides, but we just couldn't hear you. So.
Yes, and I was talking to myself. So, let me know what slide I can go back to it.
Yeah, you are a bit crackly at the moment, Gareth, is all I would say. There's a little bit of distortion on the line, so if you can find that sweet spot where you were before, that would be great.
Is this a bit better now?
That's perfect.
Perfect.
Good.
Good. As you were then. Over to Gareth. Thanks, Jakki, for that, by the way.
No problem.
Right, and are we okay starting with school strategies and whole school
please.
approach?
Yeah,
Is that where we were?
Very interesting.
Perfect. So I was just kind of looking around at the whole school approach. So what I was going to say is I think there are a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves when it comes to a whole school approach and being more holistic and not just an academic education. So things like, what are the structures that we have beyond academics at our schools? And do we have service and creativity opportunities, different clubs or trips or language immersions, sports, outdoor activities? What is it that we offer that is beyond the academics? And those are reflections that we have to have when developing a whole school approach. I think if to kind of a question of how much importance is placed on different aspects. If the answer to that question is they're not as important or they're secondary to the academics, then I think within our institutions we're proliferating the problem with mental health, adverse mental health in young people, and I think that is problematic. Yeah. And just to move on then to a human-centred teaching. For me, this is about thinking about the individual. It's about taking the time and thinking about how can we help them to be listened to. We spoke a little bit earlier about the idea of mental health when we're not listening to a young person, when they don't feel part of a community, then learning is secondary to that, so they're unable to learn. So how is it that we go about taking time to have that heard? And we'll look at that in some of the interventions later. And is it heard in what we teach? Do we take their voice into consideration in curriculum? Do we take time to celebrate their successes and support them in improving their failures? And how many opportunities do we provide for them to be themselves and to work towards their passions, such as you might see in a more personalised learning programme? And that brings me on to curriculum design.
And words that I would never normally say. Big up to Ofsted and their sudden change in direction. Amanda Spielman, in her speech about Ofsted curriculum research, she was talking about the broader curriculum and the need for balance, which was music to primary school heads' ears. It's very, very exciting times for us because we have that recognition now that the curriculum has become too narrow, and that the impact that that's having actually on children's literacy and numeracy levels, because without that broader aspect, without that holistic teaching, without sort of helping children promote those learning to learn skills, ultimately we're not going to have the impact that we need on those sort of academic subjects as well. So if we don't teach a broader education, they're never going to reach their potential, and how refreshing that Ofsted are finally recognising that. Gareth, are we still here?
Yeah, we're still here. Should we move on to the next slide then? And we'll move on to digital literacy. So I think when it comes to digital literacy, I tuned back in and you were obviously having a conversation around social media.
We were.
I think there are some conversations that we need to have as schools. We need to think about what types of programs that we have in place to support young people in becoming digitally literate. And are we teaching specific digital skills within our classrooms? And how are we integrating that use into our day-to-day classes, into their day-to-day learning? We have separated the idea of academics earlier. How do we integrate technological use into those classes in a positive manner? It's going to be used in the majority of future workplaces. And then what curriculums are we using to support ourselves in digital citizenship? So I'm a big advocate of common sense media. It has some wonderful resources, many of them free, that we can use within our classrooms that are age appropriate all the way through the key stages. and that's a resource that I would use in order to help build up some of those digital literacy skills.
And I think that one of the things that we need to consider, certainly in primary school, we spend far too much time on our curriculum looking at how to do things, and to be frank, our children know far more about computers and how to do things than I think we do. But we don't spend enough time focusing on whether or not should we do these things. So should we post a picture of our bottoms on Snapchat? Probably not, you know. But we don't have people telling the children this. So schools must sort of step in and be taking responsibility for supporting our children to become digitally literate.
Well, I think it's beholden obviously not just on schools, but parents as well, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and I think we have to take some responsibility for helping our parents get educated about it, because too often this sort of stuff happens because the parents think, oh, it's fine, they've got a Snapchat account, doesn't matter that it's 14 or whatever is the expected age limit. Yeah. What are they going to do? And then they do something daft.
And I think just to add to that, Jakki, one of the things that we definitely do here is we have parent sessions around digital use within the school and what's expected of the parents at home as well. So we bring the parents in on parent evenings, and they're reasonably well attended. But that's a nice way to bring it. And you get to hear their worries first.
Oh, you're breaking up again, Gareth, a little bit.
Oh, sorry, you get to hear those worries firsthand. That's all I was saying.
Yeah, no, well, that seems a very sensible approach. I mean, it's always the three-legged stool, isn't it? It's the school, the parents, and the child. And if everyone's working together, then I guess you get better informed children. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
Okay, I'll move that forward then. So look into interventions then, so some specifics. I'm going to start off on student wellbeing policy. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, something I've had a great opportunity at my current school in drafting, discussing and collaborating with the whole school community in creating a policy specifically for student wellbeing. I managed to get some professional learning communities going at school so we could have those discussions and look at the research and what other schools are doing around wellbeing. And also had opportunities to sit down and meet with students about what they wanted in that policy, so we could find ways that a policy could work for them and that they would have buy-in for. So both educators and students at the school would feel that it was part of their decision as well. And it ended up looking, as a bit of an overview, this is from our website, a bit like this. Those many facets from our student wellbeing program, but really there are three key areas that overarch everything that we look at when it comes to student wellbeing. The first one being student advocacy, so that ability to develop skills in participation, accountability, political literacy, open-mindedness and tolerance. And we do that through having a restorative practitioners at the school and restorative training as well. So students are involved in those discussions when there is conflict, for example. And just like with literacy setting out as it meant to go on, they had a say in how it was developed as well. And then I'm going to talk about this a little later, but cognitive coaching and mentoring. And finding a time to give and receive attention to individuals, really thinking about how we can make them have more of a part in the community and feel listened to. I'll talk a little bit more on that later. And then the last piece is student leadership. So providing opportunities to develop decision-making, communication skills, negotiation of ideas, and some real autonomy and control in the key areas of school life. So, for example, really getting the student council involved in decisions in a school. So they'll be involved in the interviews of teachers coming into the school, and they also will take classes in mentoring and mediation. So I'm just going to move that on.
Gareth, have you got any metrics about the impact of that, you know, and whether or not that's had an impact on improving mental health?
So one of the things that we did over 2 years of the program being introduced was more around perception data. We're a small data set, but we took surveys of the students at the start of the program and through the program at 6 months, 12 months and 24 months. and we took a look at how they felt it was supporting their well-being, and we did that through Likert scales and also from getting data from the students as qualitative response. And if anybody would like to take a look at that, it's on my Twitter feed, a poster piece of it, but I can share a wider piece as well if people get in touch after the webinar.
Okay. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of sort of relatively inexpensive strategies or interventions that we've put in place with a great deal of success in promoting sort of mental health and attitudes. One of those being play pods, which is a particular scheme where you have basically a storage unit full of unusual items. So if you give a child a football, generally they're going to go and play football. You might be lucky if they play a bit of basketball. They might they're going to go play catch. But we all know that football has a particular impact on our challenging behaviour statistics in school, should we say. So trying to find them an opportunity to do something different. So play pod, you fill your playground with car tyres, some rope and plastic piping and maybe a tarpaulin, and suddenly the children have to really think about what it is that they're going to do to make use of these. And it was great. The first things we put out were the car tyres and some chair backs, and suddenly we went from a playground where actually conflict was a fairly regular thing to a playground full of children who were, we had improved interaction. They were actually having to work together to design their play. We had much better communication, far less conflict, and playgrounds became areas of play, not areas of challenging behaviour. And that's very, very inexpensive to resource. You can go down to your local scrap scheme or your local, what's it called, Quick Fit, and just grab yourself some stuff. And then
sorry, Jack, so how quickly did you notice that having an effect?
The next day, well, that day.
Wow. So
that day first of all, I have to say that we had a few sort of first aid incidents because children were rolling car tyres around and sort of, it was a bit like a bowling alley at one point.
Yeah.
But we had, 2 cracking playtimes, break time and lunchtime when they were introduced. No incidences because we'd withdrawn the football at this point. And I thought, okay, well, this is just going to it'll be a sort of flash in the pan. But no, and then just gradually we just introduced more and more things, and the children became more and more imaginative in their play. And it just made for, it was so much more pleasant, and children were coming back in after lunch smiling.
Yeah.
And we weren't having to spend 20 minutes dealing with somebody fouled me, so I fouled him back. So it like I say, very, very inexpensive and almost an instant result and long-lasting. But you just have to refresh what's out there.
Sure. Yeah. They'll find ways to challenge it eventually, I guess. But
yes. Well, they had a good go at playing football with a car tyre. that soon stopped when they just realised they were going to break their toes.
Yeah.
Right. Moving on to nurture groups as well, and these can be expensive or inexpensive depending on that sort of on the scale that you want to implement them. If you go for the full nurture group experience, then you're looking for a nurture room which has got sofas and cookers and those sort of facilities. So it's much more like a home base. Down to that quiet space where you can just go and be out of the pressures of the sort of mainstream school system. And then also alongside those nurture groups where you're just focusing in on those interventions for children who are finding mainstream schooling challenging, either through the social or emotional behavioural difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got things like art therapy. So in our school in Christchurch in London, we had a resident artist for 2 days a week, and the work that she did, not just with our children but also with our parents, had a massive impact on self-esteem and mental health. It was fantastic, and it was just that opportunity to quietly. There were lots of same-side conversations, where children were able to sort of open up and discuss things that they wouldn't normally discuss because they weren't in that threatening one-on-one environment, if that makes sense.
No.
Lego therapy is another thing I'm a huge fan of. That's relatively inexpensive. You can get on eBay and get yourself a whole bunch of sets for that. And the impact that had, again, that was very quick on helping children just to develop that understanding of how to communicate with each other and how to compromise, which is a word that's not in many children's
Absolutely
vocabulary very often, you know, and it just supported some of our children who were finding making friends very, very difficult. And so just all of these relatively inexpensive but very, very available resources are having a huge impact on some of our more challenging children. And then, have we got Gareth?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm hoping I'm not crackling. Brilliant. So I'm going to talk a little bit on mentoring and a system that we developed at Halcyon. And traditionally originally we had a very traditional system. So we would have a system of students coming into the school at the start of the day, and they would spend 15 minutes with a form tutor, and then they'd go off to their first lesson. And we decided that maybe we could better utilize this time, that hour and 15 minutes. So we decided that we would group that time together, and then thinking about the amount of time given over to academics, we found some time from our academic schedule as well to get a bit more time, and we managed to get 2 hours of time a week that we could spend on mentoring. And what that looks like in a practical sense is that we have a Tuesday and a Thursday session where students meet with a mentor group for 1 hour on each of those days, and it's supported by a teacher who is their mentor, and that teacher has been cognitive coach trained, and that's done in-house, and that's looking at active listening and paraphrasing, mediative questioning, and looking at how they can help set goals with the young people that they work with, how they can reflect, and how they can resolve problems as well. So those sessions are done in that time. Every student has one 15-minute one-to-one conversation with their mentor every 2 weeks. So they have that one-to-one time, and they lead that conversation. They'll talk about what they want to talk about within the conversation. And then the rest of the time, when you're not doing that, when you're not having your 15-minute conversation in 2 weeks, because then obviously there's 3 hours 45 minutes left over a 2-week cycle, you spend that working towards your passion, what you're interested in. And I think that's really important. We're here with the Outward Bound, and where that passion idea came from was Kurt Hahn, who was one of the founders of the Outward Bound organisation, and he believed that everyone should seek a passion, and that's what we've kind of brought together. We call it the Passion Project, and students work towards that. They may bring that into their conversations, their one-to-one conversations, but what we find from that program, and that's part of the piece of internal kind of case study research that we've done, is they definitely feel listened to, they feel more comfortable in their conversations with the adults in the building, and they feel that it's supporting their well-being as well. And then just to move on to outdoor learning, we're going to talk about this in quite a bit of depth, but residentials are an integral part of the student wellbeing policy that I spoke about before at Halcyon, and we've kind of mapped these out over 6 years of secondary schooling, and I'll talk a little bit more on this a little bit later on.
Thanks, Gareth.
Great. So we all know that getting out into nature and breathing in the fresh air is good for us. And Gareth spoken earlier about the positive effects on mental health regarding being outside. And there are plenty of other people who would support this. For one, Sir Chris Bonington, who's probably Britain's most famous mountaineer. He's a massive champion of the amazing benefits of the time spent outdoors on mental health, and actually says that getting into wild country is incredibly important therapy. As well as him, there's the wonderful John Muir. He felt the same. He said, keep close to nature's heart and clear away once in a while and climb a mountain or spend a week in the woods. Wash your spirits clean, which I just love. But the backdrop is that the current environment for young people looks pretty bleak. A recent government report has shown that up to 3/4 of young people spend less time outdoors than prison inmates, and that on an average day up to a fifth don't play outside at all, which is a little bit of a worry. So what is it that makes outdoors so good for mental health? Basically, there are these 3 pathways. So the first one, directly through the restorative effects of nature, is around the organic benefits of getting out into the outdoors and connecting with nature. This is the chemical bits around breathing in the oxygen, the correlation with the reduction of the stress hormone cortisol, and the proven link to the improvement of mood and attention when in green environments. And the second and third ones, which are a bit more indirect, are around the fact that people usually end up interacting with someone and doing something physical when they're in the outdoors. It's not often that you see people out in the hills sitting on their laptops shouting, bye, bye, bye. So again, the positive effects of physical activity and social contact are well established. And these bits around building relationships and being physically active, as well as being outside, in fact, are tying into the new economic foundation's 5 points to improve well-being, which for those who aren't familiar are to connect, to be active, to take notice, to keep learning and to give, which has been widely adopted as a strategy to improve well-being. So, this slide, is the next step. So we all know that the outdoors is good. And this report on raising attainment through outdoor learning is about the magic of being outside and doing something meaningful while you're there. So this report said that 92% of schools agreed that learning in the natural environment had a positive impact on people's health and well-being, but it also showed that outdoor learning improved all these other factors, including raised attainment and better engagement as well. Now, depending on what you do in the outdoors, you can then extend that impact further. So by taking part in activities that develop self-confidence and resilience and determination and doing it in the outdoors, mean that you then benefit from, A, the restorative effect of the outdoors, as well as creating this toolkit of skills that can help prevent the onset of some of the mental health problems and promote good mental well-being. So essentially the takeaway is that learning outside the classroom, wherever and however you do it, acts as a springboard to a range of good outcomes, especially mental health and well-being. So on that note, let's hear some examples from Jakki and Gareth about what works for them in the outdoors.
And again, you know, as a primary head teacher, I'm always looking at inexpensive and easy to resource opportunities. And one of the big things that we did in our schools is to look at how we could get our children outside and learning. So we've got the big one, which is forest schools, which I think everybody knows about. And I've seen a whole range of forest schools from a sort of tiny little 2 or 3 trees with some tree trunk seats underneath it, through to, you know, schools that have got acres of woodland. So it just depends on what your setting is. But if we can get the children outside and doing all their learning outside, you know, we don't rust, so outdoors in all weathers was one of our philosophies. Through programs like Natural Thinkers, where actually they try and teach all of the curriculum through being outside. Whether or not we've got allotments, just gardens. I've heard of schools that have got, well, we had chickens and ducks and rabbits, but I've heard of other schools that have got goats, pigs, and I found out one yesterday that's got a donkey. So just getting our children out and being farmers, if you like, and just out in the fresh air, fantastic. But you can do that on a small scale from a few car tyres. I'm not obsessed with car tyres, by the way, I should say, but they are a very, very easy resource to get hold of. But a few car tyres filled with compost and potatoes to grow your potato plants, through to, you know, your full-on gardening allotment experience. I can't extol the virtues of that enough. You know, what we tend to see through this sort of light touch teaching of children being outside, because it's far more exploratory, is that we have improvements in task initiation, so children are actually starting to be able to think for themselves rather than sitting there and saying, right, what do you want me to do next, teacher? Goal-oriented persistence, seeing a child actually see something through to its end and actually be quite cross when lunchtime bell is rung because they want to finish what they're doing. You know, that's very unusual, especially in some of our children who've got sort of poorer mental health. The fact that they stick at a task rather than butterflying, well, it's fantastic. And then, of course, obviously, all the stuff around physical activity, development of gross and fine motor skills, just being prepared to get dirty and to take a risk, you know, to climb a tree. Relatively inexpensive, quick to set up, and you get an awful lot of bang for your buck.
And I think to add to that, I'm in a situation here in central London where we actually don't have very much outdoor space at all on site, and that doesn't have to limit you either. You can form relationships with other organisations, such as we have a relationship with the Royal Parks organisation out in Hyde Park, where we use use Hyde Park for certain outdoor-based activities, but also some student-led projects. So we don't have space on site for a garden. However, some of our students, through a club which we call Global Issues Network, decided that they would make a connection with a local residential home for the elderly. And they go out there every week, and they work in the garden, and they have a vegetable garden that they work on with the residents at the home, and it gives them a great opportunity to connect beyond different generations, be outside, as Jakki said, get a little bit dirty with the planting and growing, and it's something that they feel is really, really rewarding. It's something that they lead and they keep on going back to year after year, and more people get involved in every year.
And then moving on to residentials, I think that these should be prescribed experiences for everybody, especially outward bound. Bex, you'll be pleased to hear.
Yes,
so in my experience, so the school that I was head teacher at in London, we actually took our Year 6 children 3 times a year. So we did two weekends, one in September, one in March, leading up to a week in Scotland in the June, just so that we could sort of help the children develop their skills. And transformative is an understatement. Just seeing the way that our children flourished, blossomed, and all those other words, it was incredible. We've got one child who always springs to mind. So he was destined for gangs, drugs, criminality. The future for that young man looked quite bleak. He went to Eton to do his A-levels a couple of years ago, and actually he cited Outward Bound, or his outbound experiences, as a bit of a turning point for him, because he realised there was just more to life out there than just the streets of Brixton, and actually he was able to do things, and he could be successful, and that he could make some decisions for himself. So that's on a sort of very grand scale, but then just the other things that we've seen. One of my favourite experiences, we were at Abu Dhabi. We had all of the groups lined up on the jetty to do the jetty jump, and there were some very bolshy boys who were insisting that they were going off first. Oh, it'll be fine, no problems at all. And they were the ones that, I'm going to say bottled it. It's probably not politically correct. And the first person off was the last person that you would have expected based on sort of classroom. Oh, it was fantastic. She was straight up to the edge, and she almost sort of cocked a wink to those boys as she went off, much to the cheers of all the staff that were around there. And just the change in her when we went back to the classroom, I mean, it's phenomenal. And then little things like the joy of children being able to tie a knot. And then, and that actually keeps their raft together. The joy of children suddenly not being frightened of the water. We've had lots of experiences where children didn't even want to paddle at the beginning of the week, but by the end of the week at the lock, it would take 4 of us to get them out of the water. So, and these, just to see joy on the children's faces, just to see them playing rather than being these teenagers, and being able to take them to the most fantastic places. Again, another very memorable experience for me is taking my group out to Smisery Beach, and they'd never seen white sand and the sea before, and they ran in fully clothed.
Wow.
And again, experiences that they keep with them forever, and it has that enormous impact.
It's the shared experience as well, I think, Jakki, isn't it? It's the idea that these children have something then that they can talk about and relate to as a group, that will keep them going. They don't have to be friends, but it's something they all have in common. Absolutely,
and I tell you, even further than that, lots of our children grow up with that sort of sense of survival of the fittest. Life's a bit of a fight for them, whether or not they're going to get fed. They've got to look after themselves very early on, and so they learn to become distrustful. But one of the things that we noticed very much, especially with the longer programme that we did with our Year 6s, is that children sort of settled into a very easy camaraderie and were able to rely on each other in ways that we'd never sort of really seen before. And it was, I mean, sounds a bit cliche, but it was beautiful, these children that suddenly realise that they've got support networks out there.
Yeah, and they children are much more resilient than I think a lot of people give them credit for. I know you, as a head teacher, will see strengths in children. Sometimes, strengths in adversity that might surprise you.
Oh, absolutely. And just watching them nurture each other, it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that.
And I just wanted to come in on something Jakki said early on as well. The fact that Jakki has it built, they did a weekend, then a weekend, and then a longer period, a longer trip. I do think it's really important that it's not just something done once in isolation. It's a curriculum to build with the outdoors. And I was lucky enough at Halcyon to be tasked when the school set up. I've been here since the beginning of developing that residential program, and with Outward Bound, they provided me with the expertise to understand where I was going, how you could develop that over a number of years. So I said that I really wanted to develop effective skills in the young people I work with, such as perseverance, resilience, mindfulness, and motivation. And they helped me set up that program. So our program here runs from year 7 and it ends in year 12, and each year they return to the Outward Bound organisation for a week residential. So they build on the skills that they've done previously, so it gets progressively more challenging with that program. In the end, culminating at the start of sixth form when they're in year 12, where all of the students go away and they work on leadership skills, and effectively they arrive on the Monday at Ogwen Cottage, which is one of the smaller centres that Outward Bound have, and they do a pack and prep, and then they don't get back to the centre. They spend that whole time in the outdoors, but they built up those skills over the years. They don't arrive back until Thursday afternoon, and in that they will have ownership of the routes that they're taking, the direction they're taking, where they're going to be sleeping on the evenings. So they may go across a mountain range, and it's incredible to see the development from when they're 11 to when they're 16, 17, and how much they've really developed in that. I think in terms of other things on the side which weren't necessarily the goals, you spoke about that teamwork. Definitely we do at the start of our year, and we have new students come in each year, and it really helps them integrate into the community. It helps each other, support each other when they can't necessarily do something. So when I think of a student who may be fearful of going for a jog and dip and getting into the cold water, that might not be the same student who is feeling out of their comfort zone when they are doing a rock climb. But each other, they will help each other, they'll support each other through those challenges. And I think that's what's really, really important, taking those skills that they learn and then applying them outside of that outdoor experience. How does that skill relate that they had on their Outward Bound experience to not being able to necessarily do something or find it difficult to do something, to when they might be facing coursework deadlines back in school or working towards an examination? Who did they turn to? What were the questions they asked? What were some of the support structures that they had in that situation? And how can that apply now that they're back at school? And I think that's really, really, really important.
That's the key, isn't it? Turning the experience back into applicability, if you like, applying what they learned on the course to then be able to apply that in school and to learn some of the lessons from being in the great outdoors.
Absolutely.
So I'm a bit of a Twitter fan, and I follow lots of educators who are innovators and who are not frightened to shake things up a little bit. I do like mavericks. And this chap here, Justin Tart, he's a principal in America, and he's dedicated to the wider mission of education. And I love this quote of his. You're not hired to maintain the status quo, you're hired to make a difference. And actually, sometimes that's incredibly difficult to do in the melting pot of, reduced budgets, increased accountability measures. Sometimes it's easy, and also that sort of litigious society. We've become risk averse, I think, as school leaders. And so sometimes it's easier to do what we've always done rather than thinking about doing what needs to be done. But, our moral compass as educators, whatever the trouble, whatever the difficulty in achieving something, is that we need to go that extra mile and do what is necessary for each and every one of our children.
Thank you, Jakki. Well said. And thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed that. I mean, obviously some sobering statistics there, but equally, you know, it's heartening to know that with care and a few well-timed, thoughtful interventions, Jakki and her car tyres, schools can manage and even arrest the decline in pupil mental health and well-being. Just we're a little bit up against the clock, but something did occur to me, and maybe Bex, you could take this one. In terms of accessibility for less able students, is physical ability or disability a bar to the sort of things we've been talking about today in terms of getting out there, or does the Outward Bound have courses for children who are less able?
Well, it's a bit of a sliding scale, but happily there are providers across the country who are able to support any need of impairment. But certainly the Outward Bound Trust, we work incredibly hard to remain completely socially inclusive, and we can work with most mild to moderate impairments. And what usually happens is people just go through the process of filling in the relevant questionnaires and referring to our Outward Bound doctor. And then what we do is we adjust the programme to suit the needs of those individuals. So where, for example, if you've got mobility issues, we perhaps wouldn't be planning a really big expedition into the mountains. We might do a river trip with an overnight bivvy on the side of the river or something similar to that. So yes, absolutely, we would welcome anybody. Go on.
If I can just come in there, I was just, you know, in my experiences, we've taken several children either with Down syndrome up for the week-long courses, and the most recent course I did, we took a young man with cerebral palsy. And he did everything. And again, another one of those lump in the throat moments was when his peers supported him up the I can't remember the name of the really big gorge at the Lochiel Centre, which is quite daunting even to those of us who are you know relatively well able. Yes, but it was absolutely incredible. So my experience has been that we can pretty much get anybody through anything if they're in a mainstream school. So
and I want to second that as well. We had a student a couple of years back with chronic fatigue syndrome, and they changed the whole direction of the 2-night hike and camp. They did it in canoes, and that was at the Lochiel Centre as well, canoeing up through the rivers and between the locks.
Good. Well, I mean, obviously it's heartening to know that that you know you can cater for all levels of ability or disability, because it's so important, I think, to get kids outside. As you said right at the top, we spend more time inside now than we ever did. I had a rural childhood, and though I probably didn't like it much at the time and couldn't wait to move to a city, looking back, I think we were lucky to have the childhood we did. Anyway, time's against us, I'm afraid, folks, so we'll shortly be drawing this webinar to a conclusion. Remember, for those of you with colleagues who haven't been able to attend today, a recording of the webinar will shortly be available on the Education Today website. Will also be made available on the Outward Bound Trust website, I think, Bex?
Yes, absolutely.
So if there are any people out there, any colleagues who you think might benefit from watching this, please let them know. And finally, as mentioned, if you've got any questions, now there's, as the audience has been quite quiet today, you notice there's some contact details up there. Gareth and Jakki have been kind enough to provide their contact details. If you've got questions for them, please, Jakki and Gareth, I'm assuming you'd be happy to hear from our audience offline, so to speak, to maybe get a little bit more detail on the practical side of the interventions, or indeed running the courses with the trust. So with that, I'd just like to thank Jakki, Gareth and Bex again for taking the time to share their insights with us today, and also, of course, to thank you, our audience, for attending. Thank you, and goodbye for now.